Back home now, Air New Zealand boss Christopher Luxon says investigating options for a second commercial airport in Auckland is not about putting the squeeze on the current operator, it's about cheaper airfares and cutting the commute time for travellers. The airline's revealed it's in the final stages of assessing the viability of flying out of the Defence Force-owned Whenupai airbase in northwest Auckland, but hasn't yet discussed its proposal with the government. Mr Luxon, who's set to leave Air New Zealand later this month, says customers tell him transport to Auckland Airport is suboptimal and a second airport could solve those problems. So how serious is he about the idea?
Oh, look, we're really serious. We're getting a lot of feedback from our customers, and we have for some time, about how do you get better transport options to the airport and how do you get cheaper airfares, and I think Whenupai has the potential to offer us both.
OK, so what would the deal be then? How expensive would it be to set up an operation there? Is it realistic?
Yeah, well, I think that's the real attraction of this, is that Whenupai is an underutilised asset, and the reality is we could run mixed military and civil aviation out of that one airport. It's done actually, Lisa, around Honolulu, it's done in Brussels, it's done in several airports all around the world. And so actually any adjustments that we have to make, whether we have to think about, it won't be gold-plated, but imagine if we put a terminal there, any other adjustments to a runway, they're very digestible amounts of investment that a consortium or players could put together.
So what's digestible? Put a figure on it for me.
Oh, look, if you're talking $100 or $200 million, that's a very digestible sort of amount versus several billion in building a brand new airport. And so that's the trade-off here.
And who would stump up that?
Well, you could imagine a consortium of iwi, infrastructure companies, even Air New Zealand, and others that might want to get involved. It would be a very manageable thing. And
how many flights in and out of there would you need to do a day to make it viable?
Well, look, at this stage what we're talking about is 10 return flights a day to several locations across New Zealand. To give you a feel for it, we do 280 movements in and out of the Auckland domestic terminal. So we're talking, Auckland Airport will be our primary airport, but what we're trying to say here is in a city that grows north and south, why wouldn't you actually, when you've got half the population living in North Shore and also in West Auckland, why wouldn't you actually open up and take some of the pressure off Auckland Airport as a result and our transport system?
What conversations have you had with government about this?
Well, look, the reality is that this has been a topic of conversation over the last 10 to 15 years in the public domain. We actually use the airport as an alternate.
No, but what serious conversations have you had with government about this? Because this is part of the defence estate, so what conversations have there been?
So the Minister launched a review, I think, 6 weeks ago. We got hit with a media request yesterday, and we're actually we want to sit down with government in the short term and actually have a really good conversation about it.
So you haven't had any conversations with government now?
We've had ongoing conversations with Ministry of Defence about the Whenupai being used as a mixed-use infrastructure for some time. Yep.
When was the last conversation you had?
Well, I remember over my 7 years, we've had several over the last few years, talking with the different members of the military around that. But we want to sit down and have a deep, proper conversation with the ministry in the next few weeks.
What I'm trying to get is a sense of urgency here. So have there been conversations in the last 12 months or not?
No, what's happened here is 6 weeks ago, the Minister launched a review of the future of Whenupai. Yesterday, a journalist asked us a question about what do we think about that. We gave an answer to that, which we actually shared with the Ministry and gave them a heads up for in advance. And what we're saying is this is a good conversation. We've got an infrastructure crisis in the country. Auckland's creaking. Why don't we actually have this conversation, a pragmatic one? So we will deeply engage with the government. That's the first step that we need to do. Then we'll talk to the community.
So the Defence Estate Review is on currently at the moment. Have you sent any submissions or suggestions to that review?
No, not really.
Are you going to?
We will, yes, we will.
So when does that close? When are you going to do that by?
Not sure. I think what I'm saying is we're going to sit down with the government and have a proper conversation in the next few weeks.
Are you really serious about this? Because that review closes on the 30th of this month, right? And yep. I'm wondering, Ron Mark, the Defence Minister, has said he thinks that your idea is half-baked and he's questioning your motives for going public with it at this stage. What other motives do you have for going public with it right now?
No, look, our motives are very clear. We get a lot of pushback to say that Auckland is a city under huge infrastructure constraints, right? Auckland Airport is a suboptimal experience, has been for some time, likely will be with the rebuild going forward. And you can't tell me that's a world-class piece of infrastructure that we see in other advanced economies around the world. We have a review that was launched 6 weeks ago about the future of Whenupai. We'll input into that properly. We'll have a deep conversation around it. It's right that we have the conversation because in New Zealand, we can sit here and criticise the lack of infrastructure and say okay, it's not good enough, but why wouldn't we have a brave conversation and actually understand the different viewpoints in it and actually try and work out a solution?
So have you started a submission? Is a submission underway from Air New Zealand on that Defence Estate review?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep.
So how much leverage would a second airport give you with Auckland Airport when it comes to negotiating things like, landing charges?
Well, look, I think the reality for us is Auckland Airport's always going to remain our primary airport. The volume of traffic, as I said, 400 total flights going in a day, 280 domestic flights alone. So that's going to always be the anchor point for our business, no doubt about it. What we're talking about is an overflow secondary airport here. It would come with lower costs, no doubt about it. To give you a feel for it, across domestic New Zealand, landing charges, airport charges, other agency charges are 20 to 30% of an average airfare, depending on which aircraft you're trying to fly, and as a result, this would be a much cheaper option.
Yeah, so it would give you some leverage. That is one of the key advantages for you, isn't it, to have another airport?
It may be.
To put the squeeze on Auckland Airport.
No, the real motivation is you can't sit in a country where we've, over the last 5 years, had 3 million more passengers go through Auckland Domestic Airport and nothing has changed in the size of that terminal since 1966. So you either face up to that reality and those facts and actually choose to do something about it or to have a braver conversation about it, or you don't.
Yeah,
and otherwise
they're renovating it now, though, aren't they? They're doing an extensive renovation now, aren't they?
And we're involved with all of that. We're well involved with the master plan, supportive of all of that stuff. But the reality is we have a really a major pressure point. It's not a great experience. It's unlikely to be a great experience. Walking on a blue line might have been great in 1985 going from domestic to international in the rain. It's not particularly fun for an international visitor coming to New Zealand and saying, is this a world-class place or not? So we know they'll get there. We're very supportive of all of that. We'll continue to be supportive of Auckland Airport. But what we're saying is we've got an underutilised asset owned by the taxpayer that could support mixed and commercial aviation. Why wouldn't we have the conversation?
But if you're upfront about it, this is partly leverage too, isn't it? It's putting the pressure on Auckland Airport to lift its game by saying, hey, we've got somewhere else to go.
Yeah, you might say that. I disagree with that. Yeah.
You're a businessman. Competition allows you to have leverage. Surely that is part of the plan here.
Yeah, well, look, I think competition would be a good thing. It would be a byproduct of this decision, but it's not the primary reason for why we've opened this conversation. It is genuinely saying Auckland has grown tremendously. It's expanded on the north and south. You actually need to be able to, there could be a much better option. Taking 90 minutes to get from the shore when there isn't an accident on the bridge or on the motorway isn't really acceptable. And so why wouldn't we actually ask that, why wouldn't we think about, well, let's have a discussion about what else we could do at Whenupai, and use it properly.
All right, then what about the neighbours? Because really, are they going to buy into this? A lot has happened over the years, and this is a primary development area, housing development area. I mean, how welcoming do you think the locals are going to be to this concept?
I think that's right. I mean, we want to have proper community consultation. What I'm saying to you, though, is it's a very much a secondary overflow airport. You're talking about 20, movements or 10 return flights in the course of daylight hours is what we would be proposing and what we're looking at and what we're trying to stack up for our submission. As we go into that review.
But as you'll be aware, people in those suburbs and that part of the city, they fought hard against an airport previously, their commercial airport.
Yeah, but just because it was a bad idea 10 or 15 years ago doesn't mean that it's not a good idea today, right? I mean, it's right that we should still open it up and actually ask a question. And we can work in consultation with the community, work out what the constraints need to be, actually have those conversations. So I think there's a lot of people in that area, as I've seen over the course of today, and the customers writing to me saying, hey, listen, I would really appreciate being able to do a day's work in Christchurch and or Wellington and be able to leave from here and get in and out of my commute time and back to my family in a much quicker time frame. And so I think there'd be a lot of new jobs created or some new jobs created in that space as well. So I wouldn't want to presuppose just because it didn't work before this, if that's the way we always think about things, we'll never entertain anything new.
Is this a plan you're going to push when you're in Parliament?
Look, I appreciate all the career advice I've been getting over the last few months, but the reality is I'm the CEO of Air New Zealand until midnight on September the 25th, and this is an Air New Zealand issue, and we've got an opportunity with the review opening up 6 weeks ago, submissions due very shortly, for us to actually input into that. And so I'll deal with what I have to deal with after the 25th, but at the moment, I'm the CEO of Air New Zealand. This is a good conversation to us to have.
Have you spoken to opposition parties about what their position is on a commercial airport at Whenupai?
No, we haven't.
Wouldn't that be prudent?
Well, no, but we're responding to a submission, and we'll make our own submission through the lens of Air New Zealand. Other stakeholders in the process will make their comments.
So when you're out of work nearing the end of this month, what happens?
Sorry, say that again?
When you're out of work at the end of this month, what are you going to do?
Well, the first thing is I'll probably wake up, I'll fall out of bed, I'll lie in the fetal position on the floor for a bit and bawl my eyes out for 6 hours, and then I'll get off the floor and work out what I do next.
Hey, that commercial airport would be in the Upper Harbour electorate. Do you reckon an MP could get themselves, or could a person get themselves elected in Upper Harbour, that electorate, if they were pushing for a commercial airline? You know, that would be something they probably need to be a bit careful about, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've got no idea about that, Lisa.
And that's the boss of Air New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, until actually midnight on the 25th of September, as he says he's outgoing.